Ha! Sorry, put some water on my face. All right. Well, hello, everyone. It's your girl, Gabrielle. Welcome to a brand new episode of Hot Topics. I just got to adjust myself a little bit. Woo! Oh, my light went down. Oh, give me a second. Let me fix my light. I like the bright light. Okay. Is it bright? Okay. Just making sure the light's on my face. We are in a we're in a Zoom world now, so gotta make sure we get that light on that face. All right. Anyway, yes. So welcome to a brand new episode of Hot Topics. My name is Gabrielle Crichlow, and you are here at Hot Topics. All right, so Hot Topics is a part of a Step Ahead tutoring services where we're all about education and self esteem. So, welcome to the show. And let me tell you what the show is about. So, this is a show where we like to have real talk about real things. We like to talk about things in immigration. We like to talk about things with entrepreneurship, empowerment, education. We like to focus on those things. And today is no different. I am excited about today because I have a brand new guest and a brand new topic, although it's piggying back from a different topic, but it's still a new topic. So let me tell you what the topic of today is. So the topic of today is an immigrant's view on education. So for those of you who are watching or listening, right, and you have immigrant parents, or maybe you came from a different country, I'm sure you understand, right? I'm sure you understand that you have a different mindset when it comes to education, when it comes to learning. I'm sure if you've had immigrant parents, they always want to tell you, well, this is what I did back in the day, and oh, this school is here is not like how it was back home. Right? So I know I could testify to that because my parents are Trinidadian, so I know what it's like to have immigrant parents and have the immigrant upbringing, because I myself immigrated here when I was 3 years old. So, because all of my education was the American education system. Um, I don't know what it was back then, um, but just having, my experience is different from my parents' experience. And there's always that clash, boom, 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 right? So there's always that clash when it comes to immigrants and immigrant education. And well, my parents did this. Well, I did this. Well, what you doing this? Like, I don't understand all this. Listen, I could just spend 30 minutes just talking about my experience right now, but it's not about me today. It is about my guest. And let me tell you who my guest is. Her name is Christie Lazo, right? I was just on her show, and now she's on my show, so we're doing a guest swap. So I love it when I have podcasters on my show, because then we get to guest swap. So I love it when I have a podcaster on my show. And let me just tell you about who she is. She is the host of Vida with Christie Podcast, and she's an unapologetic Indigenous-Peruvian content creator focused on the decolonization of parenthood, breaking intergenerational cycles, and social justice-centric motherhood approaches. So I can't wait to talk to her. So we are just going to get right into it. So I'm just going to go ahead and bring her to the stage right now. Hi, Christie. How you doing today?
Hi, I'm doing great, Gabrielle. How are you?
I'm good. I'm good. So we're guest swapping today. I was
Mhm.
just on your show talking about tutoring and why parents wait to the last minute, and and now you're here talking about an immigrant's view on education. So I definitely want to hear your feedback, but also your experience with that. So uh, please take it away.
Yeah, for sure. So thank you so much. So as you introduced me, I'm Christy. Thank you for having me. It's a pleasure. So my educational experience, especially as an immigrant, adding a lot of complex layers to that experience. I immigrated to Canada when in the Toronto area when I was 7 years old with my family. So that means that I got a little bit of both worlds. I was already in the Peruvian education system, and then I migrated over to the Canadian context of education. So just so you know a little bit of my background, I currently, education was pushed so hard on me as a child of an immigrant, especially as a firstborn daughter within a first generation immigrant family, that I work in higher ed now. I work at a Toronto area university, and I'm also pursuing my master's, my MA degree in social justice education. So I have quite a bit of background. Like I said, it was pushed so hard on me that I'm in the education space, neck deep. So yeah, so a little bit of my context about the immigration experience is my experience in Peru, for example, was very academic centric, and we talked a little bit about this in the episode that we just recorded. But of course, for your audience, I will expand on that. Um, so it was very academic driven. There wasn't really a lot of focus. Like, of course, you want children to be happy, you want them to be healthy, but there wasn't a significant focus on the mental health aspects of schooling. Like, for example, like in grade 1, I knew in my school in Peru that I was a certain place within the classroom based on the GPAs. So the highest GPA was student number 1. Like, that was first place, second place, third place. It was like academic Olympics. So it was always like, the parent would be like, oh, my child's first place in their class and my child's second place in their class. And the second and first are always like competing. And then there's this like undertone within the parents. And I remember when I immigrated to Canada, my friends in Peru had just started grade 2, and when I immigrated to Canada, they were just wrapping up grade 2, just because of the differences in seasons, right? You go to school during the fall, winter, spring. So interestingly enough, because other countries around the world are so academically driven, and they are also at a heightened level of academic I guess lessons slash expertise, what happens is a lot of kids around the world are much more advanced than the North American context. But because of these layers of coming from, a developing like slash third world country, when I came to Canada, I was way advanced, way ahead of the children, let's say in math, because math is fairly universal. I didn't speak English, but in math, for example, I remember being given, when I first started here, easier math than what the kids were doing. And I was just checking it off like whatever, because I was like, even in my little 7-year-old brain, I was like, they're only doing this, like that's it. And then they realized, oh, wait a second, she's actually, even though she doesn't speak English, she's actually much more advanced than we thought. So my parents, of course, super concerned of like, oh my God, is she going to have to repeat grade 2? Because I technically only did 2 months of grade 2 in my life. But they said, no, she's actually advanced. She's going to learn the language eventually. She's going to be okay. So yeah, I only did 2 months of grade 2. I was advanced because of the educational context around the world. And you see this in, East Asia, South Asia, Africa, etc., like all over the world where, like, the way it works is the North American context is at a much more easygoing, and you see that in Europe as well, where like kindergarten, grade 1, grade 2 is very like play focused, and then grade 2, grade 3 you start to get into the academia. Over there it's very like, in kindergarten, you already walk in there with this giant backpack and you got like your pens and your pencils and you're doing work, right? So my experience growing up here was a little bit tricky in the sense of, and we did speak about this on my episode as well, right? My parents trying to do things like the way it was back home, especially my dad. Like, I remember sitting at the dinner table to do my homework, and I'd be in tears, and my dad would be so frustrated and angry that I'm not doing math a certain way that he expected. And this is the experience of a lot of millennials, right? First generation immigrant millennials, some Gen Z as well. it was tough. It was tough because, I eventually learned the language. I had a lot of questions, but sometimes I was seen as the disruptive child. And, the social justice piece started very early. And now I've put the puzzle pieces together that I'm older of, like, I remember sitting in history class in grade 10. And my teacher started talking about, Christopher Columbus discovering America and how great that was. And I was like, wait a second, hang on. I was like, that caused the murder of a lot of Indigenous people. Do we necessarily want to celebrate that? And I got kicked out, and it wasn't like we weren't open to ideas. It was a very like, sit down, be quiet, listen, absorb, and regurgitate on the test. So for a brain like mine, that's the reason why I've done so well in higher education, because you're expected to ask questions. You're expected to speak up. Where in elementary school, high school, you kind of just have to sit, and that was my experience. I know now it is very different, where teachers are more open to learning different aspects, different elements, different ideas, different thoughts, opinions, etc. With me growing up, it was still that little bit of like old school, sit down, be quiet, and like I said, absorb and regurgitate on the test and make sure you get it all right. So yeah, it was complex. I mean, going into higher ed, immigrant family, we like, it was just the immigrant dream, quote unquote, the American dream of, we immigrated here for a better life. And that means that the better life, like that better life definition to my parents was, you need to go to university. So I had a lot of pressure growing up academically from my parents because I needed to go to university. And it was a lot. It was, in a way, like, it was so much pressure that it was a little bit discouraging, but I knew I had to do it, and one of the things, just based on, being involved in certain, like, the communities of first generation immigrant students in higher education, one of the things, it's like, when we get into higher ed, when we graduate from higher ed, it's not, yes, we do it for us, but there's this percentage that we do it for our parents too. And that's, something that is a little bit bittersweet, because we know that, yes, it's so special because we're making up for their sacrifices. But at the same time, it's all of this pressure, all of this weight. Like, we're literally like Luisa from Encanto, right? Like, we're carrying all this family pressure, especially being a firstborn daughter within a family where it's, consistently over and over, we see in so many different families that we carry that extra weight and expectation, where I had to go to university. So here in Canada, there's like university, which is theoretical, college is more applied, right? I had to go to university. When I said, oh, hey, I want to go to college, they're like, I was like, college is a better option for me. They're like, okay, go to college, but then you have to go to university. In the case of my brother, for example, it was like, oh, it's great. He's fine. Congratulations. You got into this college program. Yay. So it was, that amount of pressure on me, different things, right? That different treatment that you see in a lot of different families based on your gender, even of the siblings, right? So those added layers, it's just different added layers that tie into that immigration experience. And then, of course, me growing up as the disruptive student that got kicked out of class, I would get my desk. I remember in elementary school, they would put my desk outside the principal's office, and they expected me to like work better by being out there, which was even more discouraging, or not being able to go out to recess. I remember they'd be like, oh, you have to stay in from recess. And one time I remember telling a teacher, I was like, I actually like staying in because it's cold outside and I don't like going outside when it's cold. So she really didn't know what to do with me because, staying in at recess was my punishment for talking in class, but I was good. I was happy. So yeah, I mean, it's just those different little layers that come into your experience. And I think one of the things that I always, now working in higher ed and doing a little bit more work in academia as well, one of the things I always recognize is that a lot of the times with us first generation immigrant students, we're navigating this on our own. There isn't really much guidance for us, in the sense of not just applying to higher education, that we're figuring it out, doing it on our own, but also within the school system that is so different than what our parents experience. And a lot of the times our parents' experiences, they think that it's still the same and they want to apply those same lessons and teachings. And sometimes there's, we butt heads in the sense of, where we say, no, my teacher did it this way. And the parent is like, yeah, but it doesn't matter because at the end of the day, the answer is right. Like, and this is the answer. And it's just like, yeah, but no, the teacher, because they mark on like how you do it rather than just get the answer right, which is what our parents, Gen X, I believe it is, experience versus us millennials. Right. So yeah, it's just added layers, lots of layers.
And thank you for sharing that. There's a lot that goes into it, and it's funny too because you can always tell like who had the immigrant parents, because it's like they have to succeed, they have to get the higher grade, or else they're gonna hear so and so from their parents. So it's like you could always tell like the fear. so so now you said you started off in the Peruvian education system and then you moved to the Canadian system. So how old were you when you came to Canada?
I was 7, so I had just finished grade 1 in Peru.
Okay, so you had only like 1 year in Peru.
A few years, because over there you start with preschool, so you start very early. So preschool, when you're like around 3, that's when you get the playtime. So it's like kindergarten here that starts at around age 5. We actually start in grade 3, so that's why we're so like or when we're 3. So then that's why it's kind of like in kindergarten there's much higher expectations because you've already counted, you've already learned your colors, etc. Right?
Oh, okay. So
Yeah.
do you remember those early years? I'm trying to think.
Yes.
You do? Okay. So what was it like? What was it like back then? Tell us about it.
Yeah, so it was, it's funny because through Facebook, I actually am in contact with one of my teachers from kindergarten, and she is just the sweetest soul in the whole wide world. And so here's the thing. So in Peru and like many other countries around the world, you have the public education system and then you have the private education system. Private education system is not as elite as we see it here in North America. It is just something that a lot of families have the privilege for, have the option for. So in my case, my schooling in Peru was part of the private system. It was lovely in the sense of my teachers were so sweet, they were so supportive. I had friends and everything was great. However, I've always been that student that's like, talked and been a little bit wigglier. And now as an adult, I realize it's because I have ADHD, but it was never diagnosed as a child.
Really?
Yes, that's right. So it was never diagnosed as a child. My parents took me to a psychologist when I was a little girl in Peru.
Ooh.
And at the time, those things were not as well known about. It was a lot of like pointing fingers rather than like, let's take a step back and look at it. So the diagnosis for me was, she's too spoiled. Don't give her so much attention and she won't be acting out so much.
Wow.
So I struggled throughout the elementary school system. I struggled through the secondary school system because I learned how to mask it. And I also gave myself little conditioning tips such as like focus bubble. I taught myself focus bubble. So every time I felt my brain wandering, I brought myself back by checking myself and saying focus bubble. So little things like that I dealt with it by myself, right? But if I was diagnosed at an early age, it would have been a very different, I think, experience for me. So, and I talked to a lot of particularly moms, women that are like, yes, I also grew up with ADHD. However, it was never diagnosed, because we know that it's harder to diagnose on females as well. So my experience, like I said, in Peru was wonderful. However, because I was always that talkative child, had something to say, wiggling in my chair, was not the sit down and be quiet type. I remember like one time a teacher in preschool, she was a supply teacher, and she was so bothered by me that she like put tape over my mouth, and I had to sit there with tape on
Really?
my mouth. Yeah.
Wow.
Which is like funny in theory, but it's one of those like, the TikToks where it's like, oh, funny, but it's not funny. It's like problematic funny.
Yeah.
So it's like now I'm like, oh, if a teacher put tape over my daughter's mouth, she'd be getting an email from me. But but just those experiences, right? Like I mentioned, getting kicked out of class in things like that, that I've had. But the school context, I mean, it was a lot. I remember like being in kindergarten, and over there you get a list. So you're in a private school, you're paying tuition, but then you get a list at the beginning of the year. And I would go with my mom to the specific bookstore / like kind of like a chapters kind of thing, like an Indigo or Barnes and Nobles type place. And basically you would get all your books. They would say like you need 5 binders, and they need to be each one for each, like for example, each topic, it needs to be this color. You need so many pencils. You need so many pencil crayons. Like you would get a list of all of the like things that you needed. I remember always that being exciting for me as a kid, because we go pick up my things and my mom would take me out for lunch, and it was just an exciting little thing, right? But even though for kindergarten, like I have a picture where I'm carrying this backpack that's probably like equivalent to my weight at that time. And then on top of that, I got my lunch bag. And then on top of that, on my other little hand, I've got a gym bag because I've got my like track and field stuff. So I'm this little like 5-6-year-old kid carrying all these things off to school, and this is very normal for a lot of other students around the world, that these kinds of things happen, right? Yeah, it's a lot. And like I remember even like writing, like in kindergarten, learning how to write a letter, and like how to address an envelope, right? So we were already writing, we were already doing math, subtraction. When I left Peru, we were starting to learn how to like multiply and stuff. So that's why when I came to Canada and they were like, oh, you may be behind, I was like actually advanced. So the other piece in Peru too was because of the privilege. Another piece that I think is important to share is because I went to a private school, and that comes with privilege. There weren't many students that looked like me. There were more white passing Peruvian students in the school. As a result, that was actually my first experience of racism, where, a little 5-6-year-old kid told me my skin color was the color of poop. And I remember going home to cry that day. And I was just heartbroken at this experience, right? So a lot of people think like, oh, did this happen to you in Canada? Like, did you start experiencing racism in Canada? And I was like, no, my first experience of racism was when I was in Peru and I was a little girl, So yeah, while it was a beautiful experience, because yes, my teachers were lovely and everything, there was of course these other experiences that, really stayed with me.
And that's interesting too, just to interject, because, you think that, racism is only in your home country, right? But it's actually global. Yeah, racism is global. Yeah. And even, and then you also think that, because you're in Peru, I guess there's this,
everyone's gonna be short and brown.
Yeah, everyone's gonna be brown, right? And it's funny how, like, even in some countries in Africa, like there's still colorism, and there's still a preference for the lighter skin tone.
Yes.
And there's like a denigration of the darker skin tone. And it's interesting, that it's not just one country, but it's a global thing as well.
Yes. Actually, it's interesting you bring that up, because just today I was having a discussion with a friend of mine that she had posted something about somebody saying how we shouldn't talk about race anymore. And I was like, no. I was like, this video was recorded so long ago that it's so important. Like when this video was recorded, like likely in the 80s, racism was a different context than it is today, but it's always existed, and it's something that we do need to talk about.
Yeah.
Because in race, I think we need to talk about race. Like I want a teacher, for example, to appreciate my child for an indigenous Latin American brown skin, curly hair girl that she is. Like this idea of I don't see the color of the student's skin. I'm like, no, it's important to see it, because you need to know that as a result of certain students having certain features or certain color of skin, they're going to be more marginalized. They're going to be more oppressed. So if you're offering them education, if you're seeing them 6-7 hours a day, 5 days a week, it's important for you to take that kind of those elements into consideration in your teaching.
Absolutely. Absolutely. So now because you said you experienced that moment in Peru. So how are things when you got to Canada? Did you have a similar experience? Worse, better?
So it expanded from there. And it's actually interesting how my life trajectory really attributed to that. So when we first moved to Canada, we moved to a city called Brampton, which is a little bit north of Toronto. At the time in the early mid-90s, it was a primarily white city. So well, depending on the area too, I would say some areas were more white than others. And the first school I went to was a Catholic school, and I remember nobody wanted to play with me because, one, I didn't look like them, and two, I was the weird girl that didn't speak English, right? So kids just really othered me. And thankfully my parents, I wasn't in that school for long. We then moved within Brampton as well, but we moved to a more centric area, and I went to a public school because it was just down the street from where we lived. And in the public school, there was kids of all races, all features, and they just welcomed me in with open arms. And it was it is something that I will always remember, because from going from this this culture shock of this little girl whose parents never even explained to her, we're moving to another country, we're staying there forever. Like they didn't even explain this to me. It was just like, surprise, pack your things. And
not even a road trip. You're thinking it's a road trip. You're going to Disneyland.
Yeah. And when I thought of Canada, I imagined igloos. I imagined igloos. Like I was going to live in an igloo. So anyways, so going into this public elementary school was just so wonderful. And I remember my first friend, her name was Courtney, and she was the sweetest black little girl, because she had, I don't know if you remember in the 90s, like you would have the twist with like those ball, the colorful ball like hair ties. Do you remember those?
So.
And you would tie them, and it was one of those things like I remember my mom did it a few times, where you tie it around your head, but if she let it go and those things popped you in the back of the head, it would hurt so bad.
Oh, the bubble? The bubble? Yeah. Okay. Yeah, I think so. Yeah.
When I said hurt so bad, you remember that. Just pop you in the back of the head. But those, and I remember she was just the sweetest girl, and I didn't speak English, but she played with me, and then from there we made other friends, right? And I'll never forget her. And I don't know, it's one of those things. I hope she's well today, but I always remember her because she really became my friend when I felt so othered and I felt so alone, right? Then my parents moved a little bit more north, because they had a really great work opportunity, my dad, but we moved to an absolutely white small town, which is where I grew up. So that sense of otherness came back. And at that time, I was a little bit older. I was about 9 or so, 9, 10. And yes, I had friends at school. However, I just always felt different. right? It was always like, even though my parents, like many Gen X parents that immigrate, it's assimilation 101. Like, we need to learn the language. We need to do all of these things to fit in. Like, I was in figure skating. My brother played hockey. They drank Tim Hortons, like it was all of these things to try to fit in and be accepted by the new society they're moving into. Where in our generation, millennial and now Gen Z is like taking it to the max of like, this is who I am and this is what makes me unique. Our parents were very different in that sense, right? So in this school, like in this small town, I was one of like the very few, like I can count them with one hand, like racialized kids in the school. And a lot of them, like it was just, you're just used to living here and your families are very assimilated. Um, so it is what it is, right? But in my case, I always felt different. I was like, there's something about me, like, I don't know if it's like I have more flavor, spice, more than salt, that, just makes me different. I am different than all of you. And I didn't know quite what it was because my parents weren't really like bringing that like proud like Latino aspect to me yet, never mind the Indigenous, because that also plays an important role of like, I'm learning what it means to have an Indigenous identity, because there was a big erasure of that with me growing up,
Yeah.
because of those class and elite systems that we have back home, right? And of course it also attributes to race and colorism, etc.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, in high school, I remember like, I remember like there was a few girls that would like try to taunt me and like call me Pocahontas and thought like that was so insulting and it's racist, of course. And they would they would try to fight me because they're like, oh, you're so confident. And I'm like that's an issue? Like that threatens
That
you? Yeah. Like, but I know at the end of the day, like when they're calling me Pocahontas and trying to make fun of me for it, I'm like, you're being racist. Like, that's at that time I just thought they're just making fun of me, but now I realize like that's racist. Um, but it's those weird things where I was like, I was very confident through my resilience. But I always, like I said, I felt othered until I got to university and I decided to go to university in Toronto because I wanted to dig more into what it means to be part of this multicultural element that Canada takes so much pride in. And so I decided a university in Toronto was where I wanted to go. And I joined the Latin American Student Association. And that's where I really discovered my identity and what it meant to be a Latin American Canadian person. And it just, from there, I feel like it opened my eyes to a new world. And that's where that snowballed into the work that I do now, right?
It was Latin American Society?
Yeah, it was this Latin
in
American
Canada.
Association. Yes. So Toronto is actually one of the most multicultural cities in the world. Like, Toronto is incredible. If you ever get a chance to come to Toronto, highly recommend it. It's incredible. Outside of Toronto is not as exciting. I mean, where I live now, it's interesting. So the town where my parents moved to, I moved back to Toronto for a few years, and then when it was time to purchase our family home, just by like a total life circumstance, we ended up moving back into the town I grew up in. And so I've been doing a lot of community organizing work at a local level in order to provide educative opportunities for the community about equity, diversity, and inclusion, because the diversity has grown so significantly at a local level. There's still a lot of people that celebrate it, but there's still a few people that are very hesitant, and they refer to things like, those city people are moving to our small town. And like, what they mean by city people, what you're trying to preserve in your small town, so it's these like undertones. So I'm really doing a lot of work to break those barriers and really celebrate what Meanwhile they're trying to other people, I'm trying to celebrate and really educate on why it is important that we embrace this diversity.
Yeah. And that I imagine that shaped your outlook of the world, and that's another thing that you brought up, that when you came to Canada, you didn't speak English, right? So you had to learn English. So that's a whole other thing there. Well, now you're navigating a whole new school system, right? And you have to learn a whole new language, right? And now you're dealing with racism. And I imagine that, this shaped your whole view of the world, and how you view the people around you, and how you view diversity. And even now with your own daughter, right? Now you're worried about, you're thinking about her hair texture and her skin color, and you want her to get, what am I trying to say? You don't want her to be treated badly based on how she looks, because that's how you were treated.
Yeah, I think it's like, my rebellious way of protecting her is of stirring the pot and educating and waking up as many people as I can through the work I do, not only like in the podcast. I also have my TikTok channel. It's called Decolonize Motherhood. And I stir the pot even more in there, because a lot of people, I feel like, are a little bit scared of the word decolonize or decolonization. They think it's just ties directly to Indigenous people. Little do they know that we are all affected by colonialism in every single way, in every single day, in different things that we do within our life. Like right now, we're all suffering from inflation. That comes from capitalism, which comes from colonization, right? And we're all like, what is going on? Why is a head of lettuce costing me $3 right now? And that, so we don't really realize that colonial systems affect us all negatively. Like, it's not necessarily because I'm Indigenous I should fight for, to decolonize. It's that it affects all of us, the fact that, my daughter, let's say, for example, she may one day, like I did, experience fat phobia, even though she is a perfectly created little girl, no matter what size she is, because she is a woman, a girl, she's going to experience fat phobia. Right? Things like that. So I'm like, that affects all of us. So it's the work I do to just try to create a better future through supporting parents with the education of their children. So a lot of that work is about raising aware and empowered children. I believe in honest parenting. I believe in speaking to your child about, it doesn't have to be an awkward dinner time situation when they're 15 years old and you sit down awkwardly around the dinner table and let's have a discussion, son. Like, it doesn't have to be that way. It can just be part of your everyday life. These conversations, like, I drive my daughter to school and the conversations that we have are incredible. Like, I open up to her about anything and everything. She has any questions, like I mentioned to you earlier, like, we Google things together, if I don't know something. But it's just having that honest conversation with her about different topics, right? Like, we recently celebrated National Day for Truth and Reconciliation here in Canada, and they call it Orange Shirt Day. So at schools, they have all the kids, all the students, all the staff, everybody wears orange shirts. But my thing is like, but are we talking about why we wear orange shirts? Because, it ties into the residential schools here in Canada. So Canada is making an attempt to recognize that, yes, residential schools happened and they negatively impact Indigenous communities here in Canada and all over Turtle Island. Like, these residential schools happened all over the Americas. They happened in the US. They happened in Canada. They happened back home in Peru. No doubt about it. Like, all over the Americas. So Canada's is doing that work, but I'm like, how important, one of the things I push is like how important it is to speak to our children about this beyond wearing on a shirt and that's all you do, because, you know, Indigenous people are sad. But like, why are they sad? Like, what's going on? What really? So I had some, you know, with resources like books, I've used to speak to my child about what's going on, like what happened to Indigenous people, and why they are oppressed and why there's intergenerational impacts. You know, and I know these are big words that I break down for her. But I break them down for her, and I feel like it's one of those things that I'd rather have her learn them from me than learn them from somebody else, and one, potentially learn inaccurate information, unsafe information, or, you know, and then me having to correct it. And a big thing about that being like, you know, education from an immigrant's point of view is particularly sex education is a big one for a lot of immigrant kids, right? We weren't talked about it. It was like, you don't talk about it. Like I remember as a child being told sex is bad. And like, Mom, how was I created then? You know? You know, like, so it was like, we never talked about it, right? Like my daughter could tell you how a baby is made, and she's been able to tell you that since she was 5. Because for me, it's not sexualizing these components in a negative way, but rather like looking at it from science, what our bodies are able to do. So it's these different components of education that I really advocate for. Even, you know, education about the 2S LGBTQ plus community. I've had a mom on my podcast speak about her experience with her child, right? And their child is non-binary, you know, and their child was on my podcast, which was incredible. And they shared how they would like to be treated by their peers and how they would like to explain to other people their identity and what that means, like their gender identity, right? And even I've had other episodes of me like talking to my daughter about the 2S LGBTQ plus community, what it means to be gay, what it means to be lesbian, like all of these issues. It's one of those things like we have the superpower, like that's like my big tagline for the work I do on my podcast is like we have the superpower as parents to shape the future by how we raise our kids. What kind of future do we want to have? Right? Do we want to have a future that's very aware, educated, proactive, ready to make change? Or do we want to have a future where it's just a bunch of kids just believing whatever information is thrown at them, not questioning things, just sitting back and not Googling or not, like, you know what I mean? Like, what kind of future do we want to have? So we have that superpower that we're able to influence the future in such an incredible way. Why are we not taking those opportunities?
Absolutely. all these opportunities are out there, and you know that's what I was saying on the show that I did with you, is that there's no reason for you not to know anything. You know, there's all this stuff is out there. You could take a class, you know, there's Google, there's YouTube, there's books, you know, all of this stuff is out there. And there's free resources that are out there as well. If you know, if money is an issue, you just have to find it. And so yeah, there's no reason for you not to know anything. And that was one of the things I talked about on your show. And I think it's I guess I place so much value on education because it was placed so much on me, and also like I didn't really do anything else. I was kind of antisocial, so it's sort of like, well, education is all I know. But yeah, I feel like even with this generation now, unfortunately, in some families, education is not as valued and is not as important. But employment is, getting a job is, making money is, but education is not so valued. And that's what I tend to see now. And I think it is kind of sad. There seems to be a decline, I think, but and that's what I push so hard when it comes to my own tutoring sessions, and even I push as hard as I can,
Mm-hmm.
right? Some people don't like to be pushed, and it's like, oh, there's only so much I could do, but I push as far as I can, because I feel, because I was pushed, so I push others. I'm the product of my upbringing.
You remind me of, like Mean Girls, where the teacher's like, I'm a pusher. I'm a pusher. I don't know if you remember that, like that one of Mean Girls, the movie with Lindsay Lohan, and the teacher says like she's pushing her on her math homework, and she's like, it's because I'm a pusher and I'm gonna push you.
Yeah. So that's my upbringing, and it's trickling down to my tutoring sessions, and to my business, and to my interactions with kids. So
Yeah,
so
definitely. I think there's opportunities to learn every day. Like, to me, learning education is not just from the school system. I think you could obtain opportunities to learn in every single day because we have the internet now. There's I really love the website Coursera. I highly recommend it to anybody that's like, I want to learn about this thing. I'm like, go look it up in Coursera, because Coursera offers I'm like doing a full ad right now, but I really, really like it because they offer courses. You're not technically enrolled and you don't get a credit. Some of them you could get a certificate for, though. But they offer courses on all kinds of topics from universities. They're actually university courses, college courses that you could take on whatever topic. So with the internet, we have this accessibility to education that our parents and our ancestors did not have. However, there's different types of education too, because when we think about ancestral education, a lot of our ancestors didn't necessarily go to high school even, they didn't necessarily go to universities, all those things, but there was ancestral knowledge passed down from generation to generation, and that's also a really beautiful form of education. You're right in that I also felt that pressure to be above and beyond and be extra as hell when it came to my education within the traditional school system. Hence
yeah,
why I am now doing my master's degree, and I hope to do my PhD in the future. Um, but the thing is, one of the things I learned in doing this educational work is also like, in some of the research that I've done, is that a lot of families don't know anybody. Like, they don't think that that's even accessible to them. They don't know anybody. Like, their priority is just, you finish high school, if you do, and then you have to make money, because a lot of families are in survival mode, right?
yeah,
So making money is their way of making ends meet to continue living. So that's what makes education a privilege, right? Being able to do it part-time or stop working or whatever, put some responsibilities aside to make that time for education. While I think it is incredibly important, I can't, me personally, in the work I'm doing, I can't devalue somebody for making the decision to not pursue higher education, because I recognize the weight that is on somebody's life, etc., right? And also the accessibility of it. Like, education is incredibly expensive, right? So a lot of families, I'm like, that's part of the work I'm doing in higher education, of like making it more accessible. I'm always advocating for more scholarships for students, domestic students, international students. We need more funding from students. We need to break those barriers that if you don't have money, then therefore you shouldn't access this ivory tower of higher ed or in academia. Like, that's not okay to me. So therefore, and even student loans, you know what I mean? Like,
yeah.
student loans are a whole like other can of worms that I think we'll save for another episode, because that's a whole other issue, right? Like, so it's, to me, like, education, while I've been raised to think, yes, you have to go to university and that is so important, I think there's also many forms of education that aren't necessarily within the traditional school system, right? It's funny that you made me think of a friend of mine asked me one day, she's like, so what would you do if like your daughter said she didn't want to go to university or college? She just wanted to work. And she probably asked me that question like 4 years ago, and to this day it stumps me. Because I'm like, my brain is so conditioned to think that higher education is what you need to do. But at the same time, I want to be respectful of what my daughter wants for herself and how she measures success and how she defines it, of course, within healthy boundaries, right? So it's a really tricky question. When she to this
Did you ever
day
answer
about that
her? What did
question,
you
and
say?
it stumps me. Pardon?
Did you ever answer her? What did you say?
No, I was literally like, I honestly don't know. Like, if somebody else says I don't want to pursue higher education, I'm like, I get it. Like, you do you, boo. But with my daughter, I'm like, oh my goodness, like what? Because I just understand the context of what that means right now in today's age of, they say like, the other day I saw a TikTok and it was like described so perfectly. And it said like our grandparents, it was only like one person working. They had a 4-bedroom house, like 2-car garage, all of these fancy. Our parents' generation, it was like, they had to work hard, like both parents worked. They had like the house and everything. And it was like millennials all of us have a master's degree, but no job. Like, how did we get here? Because like, that's realistically, that's the context right now. Like, that is a very real context of our, I guess, employment system right now when it comes to careers, that having a bachelor degree right now is not enough unless you're in like even if you're into the trades, you still have to do so many hours of service to get your certification, right? So yeah, it'll be interesting to see what it's like when our children get to that stage. And also, I started saving for my daughter like literally when she was born, because I was like, if it costs this much for me to go to school, how much is it going to cost for her when she gets there in 18 years, right? So lots of things to take into consideration.
Lots of things to take into consideration is right. But we don't have the time to get into all that. So let's start to wind things down now. And it looks like we're going into overtime, but that's okay. All right. So what's I like to ask my guests any parting words that they want to leave, any words of wisdom. So do you have any words of wisdom that you'd like to share with our audience?
Yeah, when it comes to education, especially if you're a parent or a guardian of somebody in the education system or the education system yourself, like, don't ever hesitate to advocate for yourself. Put your hand up when you need to. Send that email to whoever needs to hear it. If you feel uncomfortable, anything that is going on, do not hesitate to advocate for yourself or your child. Because it is so, so important for our voices to be heard. I think that there's a lot of things that could be improved within the education system. So not only within the education system of like advocate to the teacher or advocate to the principal. I mean, advocate to the political party or the political party that's in charge of funding the schools. If you have to send them a tweet, which I often send spicy tweets over to our Minister of Education, our premier here in Ontario, because they are just, it's like literally a dumpster fire and they don't care. So I often send them spicy tweets and whatnot. It's so, so important to advocate for education. Education is not funded enough. Teachers that are taking care of our students, like of our children, so many hours a week, are not paid enough. ECEs, early childhood educators, So I think it's so important to not only advocate for the experiences that you or your children have, but advocate for the system in itself. And don't hesitate to stir the pot, speak up, be unapologetic, because this is, the education system is the future.
That's right. and invest in your education, which is what I was talking about on your show as well. You
Mm-hmm.
know, we should invest in the education, because it's when you invest in education, you're changing the world around you, right? So it's not I know I'm reiterating things from my show with you. So by
Mm-hmm.
the way, check it out on her podcast. Um, but yeah, it's you're it's not just passing a test. It's not just passing a class. It's you're changing society. You're changing their life trajectory, right? So when you invest in education, then they're not going to war. They're
Yeah.
not going to fight in a war. Um they're not going to prison. They're not um they're keeping out of trouble, right? So it's you're reducing crime, you're reducing truancy, you're reducing um I'm trying to think. You're increasing the number of productive members of society. You're increasing people in the workforce. You're 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 decreasing discrimination, right? So there's all when you invest in education, you invest in the improvement of society. And there you go. And on that note, let's jump to your promo. We got to do a part two. This was an interesting conversation. All right, but we got to get to your promo, Christie. All right, so you guys, Christie is all over social media, and she has a website, which is just her podcast, I believe. So her website is vidawithchristie.com. You could also follow her on Facebook and Instagram with the handle Vida with Christie. She is on Twitter with the handle VWC Podcast. You could also find her on YouTube. It is just Vida with Christie. And I did not add a little separation there. But with TikTok, it is decolonized motherhood. So those are her handles. If you missed any of this, don't worry. All of this is in the description, and it is scrolling below at the bottom of your screen right now. So if you are watching this on video, it is in the scrolling marquee down below. But or if it's in the description if you're watching this on YouTube. If you are listening to this, whether it's on Spotify or Podchaser or Apple Podcasts or any kind of podcast platform, this information is in the description. So, if you missed it when I just said it, please check it out in the description. So all this information will be available. All right, I want to make sure we talk about your podcast. So you have a podcast called Vida with Christie. Tell us about it.
Yeah, so I snuck in a few pieces there, I guess, of the work I do within the podcast and the parenting space. So it's a lot about that educational piece and support for parents, primarily trying to break those intergenerational cycles and raise their kids in more of aware, empowered, and just overall healthy place, particularly like mental health wise. We know a lot of us, children of immigrants in particular, know how, even though our parents love us dearly and had the best intentions, how some of their approaches affected us, some positively, but some of them negatively. So we want to do things different for our children. And so that's the work I do with my podcast. I tackle different topics, I bring on different experts. So in your case, I was excited to speak to you for my show because, we know there's a lot of taboo to reach out for help and support when it comes to tutoring, because a lot of parents feel like, oh, I can help my child. I know what I'm doing. And then once they open up that textbook, they're like, let me see. I don't, you know? And then, of course, children are having a challenging time and it's a little bit more discouraging sometimes, right? So yeah, I tackle different topics that have to do with breaking those intergenerational cycles. So I welcome y'all to listen, and you can find it wherever podcasts are available or at vidawithchristie.com.
There you go. So you heard it from her yourself. So, I was on there, so you'll hear my episode. But check out her podcast. It is called Vida with Christie, and you can find it wherever there are podcasts. So you can find it on your favorite podcast platform. So I encourage you to check it out. And let me just reiterate her contacts once again. You can find her online. Her website is vidawithchristie.com. You can follow her on Facebook and Instagram with the handles Vida with Christie. You could also follow her on Twitter. It is VWC Podcast. That's the handle. You could follow her, and I remembered the little marquee thing. All right, so you could also follow her on YouTube. The name of the channel is just Vida with Christie. And you can also follow her on TikTok. Her handle is Decolonized Motherhood. Those are her handles. I encourage you to go to all of her social media accounts and follow all of her social media accounts. So do so right now. It is on your screen if you are watching on video. If you're listening on audio, it is in the description. Either way that you're taking in this episode, this information is at your fingertips. There is no reason for you not to know anything. All of this information is in your face. All right. Whew, Christie, thank you so much for joining me today.
Well, thank you for having me. This was a pleasure. I loved it.
This is fun. We got to do this again. I didn't even know about the ADHD. I have a whole thread. I have a whole YouTube playlist on ADHD. So, I gotta get you on the YouTube playlist.
Yeah.
All right. Yeah. All right, my dear. So let me place you backstage. All right, you guys, and it is just you and me. I know we're over time. I feel it in my voice, but sometimes when things are going so good, you just don't want to stop. All right, but we got to start to wrap things up. All right, so you guys, we have reached the conclusion of yet another episode. Thank you so much for joining me today. Let me tell you, I encourage you to leave your feedback. I want to know, what did you think of this episode? What were your thoughts? What were your feelings? What did you learn? What didn't you learn? Any complaints, whatever it is? I want to know what you thought about this episode. Leave your comments, leave your feelings, your thoughts, whatever. Leave it in the comment section below or in the comment thread. Or, wherever you can leave a comment, drop a line. Let us know what you thought about this episode. I definitely will appreciate your feedback. So if you're watching this on YouTube or Facebook or Twitter, let us know what you thought about this episode. Leave your comment in the comment section or in the comment thread. Let us know your thoughts. If you are listening to this on audio, whether it's like Apple Podcasts or Spotify, drop a rating. Drop a rating. Let us know what you think about this episode. Please rate our podcast. It helps us a lot. So definitely give us a rating. And I wanted to remind you that this podcast is a production of, you guessed it, A Step Ahead Tutoring Services. This is what this whole thing is about. It's about tutoring. So if you are looking for a tutor for your child, do not wait until the last minute. Don't wait till the last minute. Make sure use tutoring as a preventative measure, not a reactive measure, which is, I took it from Christie's episode. So listen to my episode on her podcast. You'll know what I'm talking about. But wherever you are in the tutoring cycle, if you are looking for a tutor for your child, or even if it's for yourself, because we also work with adults, reach out to us. Our website is www.astepAheadtutoringservices.com. You can also email us, success@astepAheadtutoringservices.com. You could also find us on multiple social media platforms. You can find us on Facebook, and Instagram with the handles A Step Ahead Tutoring Services. YouTube is just A Step Ahead Tutoring Services. Twitter is Tutor ASATS. That's TUTOR ASATS. We're also on WhatsApp as well for my international clients or international viewers and audience. Excuse me. What else? I think I'm forgetting something else. I feel like I'm forgetting something else. But either way, Instagram. No, I said Instagram. We're on multiple social media platforms, so check us out on all of our social media platforms and follow us on all of our social media platforms. Stay in touch with us. And finally, Hot Topics has a text blast. I encourage you to get on it. You will learn about anything and everything there is about Hot Topics, about live episodes, about audio releases, anything relating to hot topics. If you enjoyed this show, whoa, my camera is shaking, sorry. If you enjoyed this show, stay in touch with us. Stay in touch with us. All you have to do is text the code Hot Topics to 917-764-3975. Again, text the code Hot Topics to 917-764-3975. I believe it is only for US and Canada. So if you happen to be in any other country, hit us up via email. Success at a step ahead tutoringservices.com. And I'm going to pose a challenge to all of you right now. I want you to share this episode. So here's what I want you to do. As soon as this episode is done, I want you to text 2 people. Okay, I'm giving you a challenge. I want you to pick 2 random people. Go to the contact list on your phone and just pick 2 random people. I'm gonna see. So pick someone that starts with the letter R and the letter L. All right, so I gave you 2 letters. So I want you to go to your contact list on your phone on right now. So find somebody's name who starts with the letter R and the letter L, and I want you to text those 2 people about this episode. I'm giving you that challenge. I'm posing that challenge to you right now. Okay, I think we're good. So I'm going to wrap it up right here. And we are over time, but that is okay. Thank you guys so much for joining me on this episode today. And please join us on the next episode. Thank you guys so much. I am signing off now. See you later, guys. Bye.